Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. My name is Roland Vogt. On behalf of the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all. Please allow me in introduction to just say three things. First, I want to express my most sincere gratitude to Mr. Ronnie Chan, Chairman of the Asia Society Hong Kong, to Ms. Alice Mong, President of this Asia Society Hong Kong, and to the entire team here for this wonderful evening tonight. We greatly appreciate the close collaboration between our entities and are immensely grateful to you for so proactively supporting Holocaust awareness and tolerance education. The Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center is the leading center of its kind anywhere east of Jerusalem and west of Melbourne. As an independent educational nonprofit organization, it is our mission to provide accurate information about the Holocaust, educate about our past, and inspire young people to make things better in the future. Every year, we work with many schools, universities, cultural and civil society organizations in Hong Kong, Macau, and the Greater Bay Area. The outcomes are remarkable. Every year, there are more requests from an ever-growing networks of schools to assist them with content, curricular matters, expertise, and research resources. Our projects include talks, seminars, workshops with professionals, media work, public exhibitions, and events like this one tonight. Every January, we bring a Holocaust survivor to Hong Kong and Macau for a speaking tour. And this is what brings me to my second point. We're greatly honored and delighted to have with us our two keynote speakers, Professor Mark Spigelman and Mrs. Rachel Spigelman. Mark is a survivor of the Shoah, and one of the very few of his family who survived the horrors of the genocide perpetrated by Germany against the Jews of Europe. Both of Rachel's parents were Holocaust survivors as well. Their testimony is truly special, and we're delighted that they agreed to travel all the way to Australia to Hong Kong to talk to hundreds of students, do media interviews, and talk to business people over the last 10 days. It has been very intense for them, but their dedication, energy, and compassion is absolutely breathtaking and has touched us all. The images behind me give you just a brief glimpse of the many events we've had with Mark and Rachel. In a few minutes, we will hear from Mark and Rachel in conversation with Mr. Chan. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions. Being able to hear, listen to, talk to, interact with a survivor of the Shoah is a real gift, for it is very rare, and it is getting rarer still with every passing year. So let's cherish the moment. And this brings me to my third and last point. What do we do when we do not have the privilege of being in the presence of a Holocaust survivor? For most of the year, this is actually the case, but our work never stops. And please allow me just to give you two brief illustrations of how we bring testimony alive. In partnership with the USC Shoah Foundation, we brought to Hong Kong a highly innovative way of engaging with the past. We're the first and only organization in Asia to do this. The platform is called Dimensions in Testimony. Survivors of the Holocaust, but also of the Rwandan genocide, the Nanjing Massacre, and the brutal Japanese occupation of China have been recorded in such a way that we can interact with it directly with this testimony. AI makes it all possible. You ask a question, and the AI instantaneously brings up the right answer. Please try it out. I hope you had the chance to do so while it was in the foyer. We had in the foyer 3 stations with testimony from the Shoah, as well as Madame Xia, a survivor of the Nanjing Massacre, and, as a first in Asia, Grandma Peng, who suffered unspeakably as a comfort woman. Please note that the questions to Madame Xia and Grandma Peng were to be in Mandarin only. This also shows us the language issues that these systems need to navigate. The famous director Steven Spielberg inspired this technology after he himself became intrigued and interested in Holocaust education when producing Schindler's List in 1993. The second technology is even more eye-catching and cutting edge. This is the first time it's being shown here in Hong Kong. It is called The Last Goodbye, And it involves the story of Pinchas Gutter. And if you might recall, some of you, that we had Pinchas Gutter joining us for the 2023 event here in this very same hall. He was a Polish Holocaust survivor who was filmed on site at Majdanek concentration camp, which he survived as a boy. Please note that Majdanek concentration camp is, together with Auschwitz, the only one that was captured while still intact. We have 3 virtual reality goggles here tonight, and I strongly encourage you to try them out. If you haven't done so, we will bring it back, and there will be plenty of opportunities to do so. And Pinchas will take you on a journey of what he lived through at Majdanek. I want to finish with the following. Not so long ago, not so far away. With the passage of time, many young people begin to see World War II and the Holocaust as something distant, both chronologically and geographically. Something old in black and white. Well, that's not true. As we've heard before from Professor Mitter, World War II ravaged through our beloved city and through all of China with shocking ferocity. Mark and Rachel, Madame Xia, Pinchas Gutter, and all the others are still with us to tell us what happened to them and their families. All of this happened not far away, but right here. Not long ago, but all within their lifetimes. We receive a great present from them, knowledge. Nobody can turn around and say we did not know, we forgot, we did not want to remember. Because history teaches us over and over again, ignorance is the first seed of hate. Knowledge, education, compassion, respect, and humanity set us free. Let's remind us of that on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and the end of World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, my last duty is now to invite onto the stage Mr. Ronnie Chan and our 2 special guests, Professor Mark and Mrs. Rachel Spigelman. Please join me in welcoming to the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're in for, I don't want to say treat, you're in for an experience of discussing with people who have gone through the deepest of human sufferings and yet survived. We do have 100 students here. They have a lot of questions here on my iPad. But beyond that, if you have any more questions later, feel free to do so. As is always our case here, Mark and Rachel, you should know that we have a house rule, and that is if somebody raises a hand at the same time a student raises a hand, the student has the precedence. You agree? Good. We are in the same line. Mark, you told me that you haven't been to Hong Kong for now 5 years before COVID. Welcome back. You have talked to a lot of students here. How do they differ from the student anywhere? You enjoy your experience here? Tell us about it.
Yes, I must tell you, I enjoyed Hong Kong very much, but the most enjoyable thing was interacting with your students. They're not only polite, they actually listen to me. And they ask questions. And what impressed me was they asked questions which were relevant, intelligent, and even more important, they'd ask questions about what I'd said. In other words, they actually listened. And I've had students, spoken to students all over the world, America, Europe, Israel, Australia. I found the students here today among the best and most intelligent students I've dealt with, and I want to congratulate all you parents who've raised good students, and please don't let the students hear this because they'll get swell-headed.
Mark, just so that everybody knows your history, if you don't mind, you were born in 1940. That was already at the height of the Nazi terrible Holocaust. And tell us just in 2 or 3 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, your growing up, what was it like in those first couple of years, and how, and what did you do after the end of the war?
2 or 3 minutes, wow.
Take 5.
84 years.
Just the first part.
I was born in 1940 to Jewish parents, and
in Poland?
In Poland, in a little town called Będzin, 60,000 people, 30,000 Jewish people, 30,000 Christians. My parents made a big mistake on my birth. They gave me the covenant with Abraham, which is the Jewish boys in the first week of life have a circumcision, which not a good idea in German-occupied Poland, because the Germans were determined to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. How do you tell a Jewish boy in Poland in 1940? You pull his pants down. If he's circumcised, he's Jewish. Therefore, believe it or not, I spent the next 5 years of my life as one of the most beautiful girls you will ever see.
What's your name? It's not Mark. So did they give you a new name?
Look, I don't know. I
know.
don't remember. I'm sure my parents just called me Mark, but
Not in public.
The most beautiful young girl, blonde-headed, blue-eyed.
I had long blonde hair and blue eyes. That's one picture of me. That's the little girl there is me. Now, have a look at that picture.
Wow.
That's me.
I-
Long
is
blonde
she-
hair.
Is she pretty? Or is he handsome?
And just to show you the tragedy of this period, next to me is my grandfather, Yakov, and my little first cousin, Putzek. Putzek is the only child I ever played with until the age of 6. Because once we went into hiding from the Germans, I couldn't talk to another child. In fact, I was given instructions. Don't talk, don't cry. If anybody comes to you and starts talking to you or does anything to you, you do one thing or two things. You open your big blue eyes and you smile. Why was that? Because the German propaganda had Jews as short, dark-skinned with dark eyes. So I was not on their radar as a typical Jew. And there are many stories of my survival. A few of them are memories, but they are later in life. But most of my stories of survival depend on my nightmares, the things that wake me at night. Anything that was shocking and life-threatening has remained in here, but it's been subdued. But at night, and all my life I've had these nightmares. I may even have one tonight. They don't disturb me much anymore because I'm used to them. But I wake up, I'm trembling, I'm shaking, I'm sweating, and I've got a memory of something. I'll give you an example. At one stage, my mother and I were foraging for food. She also had blonde hair. And we were caught in a German roundup, which meant the Germans surrounded an area of town, asked for everybody's papers. If you were Jewish, they would put you on a train to Auschwitz and you'd be dead that day. They would gas and burn you. We got caught like that. And my mother was asked for papers. She said, I don't have them, I've forgotten. I said, oh yes, go to this queue. This queue, she noted, had old people, women and children, people without papers. This queue had young people, people with papers. We've come to call it the queue of death and the queue of life. My mother was sent to this queue and she went around to this queue. This enraged the Germans and they started beating us. What's my nightmare? I'm awake, I'm being hit by sticks. And I'm opening my eyes and smiling. And my first thoughts on waking is, in that days it was in Polish, this is ridiculous. Why am I smiling when it hurts? Now, Fortunately, this brought the German officer in charge. Now, this is an evil man. He's not a nice person. He was sending maybe 100 people to their deaths. He asked, what's going on? Oh, this Jewess, she was sent to this queue. She keeps trying to get into this queue. And the German officer looked at me, looked at my mother, and said, Madam, take your child, your little girl, and go that way, the queue of life. Your daughter reminds me so much of my little daughter back in Germany, wow. And I miss her so much. So I'm here telling you this story because this man, this evil man, loved his daughter, not because he loved me. He had no compassion for me. And what that should tell us of an important fact about the Shoah, about the Holocaust. People will have you believe the Holocaust was done by crazy psychopaths. The Shoah was done by normal men who are family men and loved their daughters, because psychopaths can't make trains run on time. They can't sustain a factory like Auschwitz. Now, you say to me, Auschwitz wasn't a factory. Yes, it was. Its product were dead, burnt Jews. But in order to get to that final stage, you had to supply fuel, you had to supply gas. Trains had to run on time. Ordinary men were doing this, not psychopaths. So I hope that gives you some explanation as the horrors and the illogicality of the Shoah.
Thank you. Rachel, tell us a little about your parents. Your parents were both Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
What happened to them?
Well, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was born 16 months to a mother who was liberated 16 months beforehand from a concentration camp. I was given the names actually Sarah and Rachel after my two grandmothers who were actually killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau. So I am their memory. My mother was in concentration camps from the age of 16 to the age of 19. It wasn't an extermination camp, but it was a work camp which actually was very difficult. She was walking around in the snow from her barracks to the factory, working on ammunition. She had no shoes. Her feet were wrapped around with newspapers. She had terrible ear infections. And one story I want to tell about it, that she felt that she can't live anymore with that infection, and she went to the infirmary. There was an infirmary not far from her barracks. She walked in there and asked the nurse, who happened to be from her hometown, she was a Polish woman, and she asked her, could I be admitted? I can't stand anymore. I've got pus in my ears. Could you help me? And that Polish nurse looked at her and she said, Bella, you can't stay here. I'll give you some medication. You've got to go back to your barracks, because I know that tomorrow morning the Gestapo is going to come here and liquidate the whole infirmary and send them straight to the gas chambers.
Wow.
So she was saved in the nick of time. She went back, suffered, and after the war, after having me, had to undergo operations and treatment for her misfortune. My father ran away with his two brothers as the war broke out to Russia. They got there, I don't know how. He didn't tell us much, but he said he had a very hard life in different kolkhozes. In Siberia, he was mining. He was slave labor. He then went to Uzbekistan. He became a shepherd, but ended the war, I must say on a good note. For the last 6 months of the Russian war, somebody heard him sing. He was a beautiful lyric tenor. And they took him to the Red Army Choir. And that's how he survived the last 6 months.
And your mother eventually...
My mother eventually got liberated from the camp and found out that her mother, father, brother, sister, her little girl and her husband were all killed in Auschwitz. She had one sister remaining, and she happened to be in a camp next to her. They were both younger. They were 16 and 15 when they went into concentration camp, and somehow with typhoid, bad ears, all of that survived.
Thank God. Mark, how was you mentioned that the first couple of years of your life, you had no companion, except at the beginning your cousin. You never interacted with anybody. What did you do in those 5 years before liberation?
I learned to survive.
Or your mother let you to survive? I had to be trained. I believe I was repeatedly told, never speak in public, never do this, never do this. Eat everything off your plate because you don't know if you'll the next meal, where the next meal will come from. And basically, I don't know. At one stage, I was hidden in a hole in the ground, known as a bunker in our family's history. And this was a room inside a factory making boots, and my father had made a sort of a hole behind a wall of boots. And I was smuggled into this ghetto, and I must tell you, the reason I was smuggled into this ghetto is because when they formed the ghetto in our hometown, the Germans first got rid of 2/3 of the population. They put them on a train, cattle cars, off to Auschwitz. The rest of the population was told, we're going to put you in a ghetto and you'll be working in a factory, which was true. And they said, bring all your children, bring all your goods, we're going to look after you. My father just didn't believe the Germans, so he hid me with some Poles, and I spent a few weeks or maybe even longer in an attic, in one corner of an attic where there was no light. And I have no idea how I survived that, because apart from the Polish people leaving some food for me in a grate, I had no human contact. But then I was put in the hole in the ground when I was smuggled into the ghetto. And the reason I feel very lucky is the people who brought their children to the ghetto had their children forcibly removed. All the children were put on a train, taken to Auschwitz, killed the same day, most likely. Now, I'll give you an example of how lucky I am. Our town had 30,000 Jewish people. There must have been 6,000 kids. Three children survived. So my chances of being here are probably 1 in 2,000. And that's the horrors of what was perpetrated on people who didn't do anything. They weren't killing people, they weren't doing anything. They were trying to live a normal life, and yet they were doomed for extermination by people who for some reason decided that was a good thing to do. So in this hole in the ground,
my parents would come whenever they could, because it was in the ghetto, and give me food whenever they could. And you asked what I was doing there. It was difficult, right? I had no contact with a living organism, a person. But I found a way, because when my parents brought me food, I would drop some food next to me, and the rats would come to eat it.
The rats.
And
the mice.
We became friends. They'd eat the food, but they'd stand next to me, because that's where I dropped it, deliberately. And I have this memory of stroking something a little furry, but warm. And that's how I spent my time in the hole in the ground. I was there for several months.
You were very lucky that later you can have Raquel. It's far better to have Raquel than the rat. That's terrible. That is terrible. That's terrible. So you were all, liberated around January 27th, 1945. Did you have any awareness what was going on?
Well, in January 27th, and I must tell you, ladies and gentlemen, and please don't listen, it's the most important day of my life till I met Rahel. But don't tell her I said that.
I'll tell her.
On that day, we were hiding in a farm very close to Auschwitz. My crazy parents, who'd spent 4 years doing all sorts of things to survive, decided that the best way to end the war was to find a farm as close to Auschwitz as possible. They later said, we decided that if prisoners escaped from Auschwitz, the Germans wouldn't look for them right next to Auschwitz, they'd expect them to run away further. It worked. So a little girl is fast asleep, and it's the 27th of January.
That's you?
45. Yes, well, I was still a girl, you see, the war was on. And he or she gets woken up. We'd been hearing fighting, cannons roaring for weeks, because the battle was there. I got woken up because all of a sudden there was silence. The war had stopped.
Silence can wake you up.
Silence stops you sleeping. And I did something a little bit naughty, because we were in a room with a blind drawn, and I was warned never ever look out the window, because you're not supposed to be there, and if somebody spots you. But I couldn't understand the silence, so I went and had a peek. And there, crawling through the snow, were a couple of soldiers in white camouflage in the snow. But I looked at the guns. Now, I was 5, and I recognized, for some unknown reason, that those guns were not German guns, but Russian guns. And I knew my war was over. My battles just began, but the war was over. That was the greatest day of my life, till you know when.
Did the Russians treated you guys fairly well?
Yes, nobody's asked me that. Yes. 2 days or 3 days after the Russians came, a tank and 2 jeeps pulled up in front of a farmhouse, and they said, "Where are the Jews?" Okay. They said, "You're coming with us." We were taken to a big tent where there was a huge man. He was probably this tall, but I was this tall, so he looked big.
He was my size.
No,
Big.
shorter. He had a fur coat on, and he said to my parents, he said, "Is this the Jewish child?" My father said, "Yes." So the guy ran up to me, grabbed me, and started kissing me. And I remember looking over my father's shoulder and saying, "What the hell? What's this guy doing?" What he was saying in Russian, I was told later, he was saying, "For 1,000 days and 1,000 kilometers, I've taken my troops across Europe. My wife begged me. She was Jewish. She said, 'Find me a Jewish child for our children to play.' And after 1,000 days and 1,000 miles, you're the child."
Wow.
And I must tell you, the best period of my life was the next week. The general told a couple of tanks and jeeps, "You look after him, don't you dare let anything happen to him, and you do whatever he says." So I spent running around saying, "Go here, go there." And they would do exactly what I said. So that was the Russians.
That was when you returned to become a boy.
Yes, by then, within a couple of days, I had my hair shorn, and I think they did too good a job, but that's a different story. And yes, I never thought I was a girl. You know, I was a boy. It's just the way they've dressed me, and I got used to it.
You survived.
And I was told, you have to be like this in order to survive. And here I am.
Very good. Now, tell me, you mentioned that the really evil people are actually very normal people.
Yes.
Does it mean that in every one of us, whom I assume is very normal here, there is something in us that potentially can do damage to others?
Well,
and why was that the case?
It's a question I've been asking all my life. I haven't got an answer. I think the education system is important. Remember, there was anti-Semitism in Germany, but the Jewish population of Germany, for instance, was so long there and so settled in, many of them considered themselves more German than Jewish. But the Nazis took over in 1933, and 7 years later, they had hundreds of young men, and thousands in fact, of young men who were willing to kill children. Remember, when I was born, I wasn't Jewish. I didn't know what I was. I was a blank sheet of paper. And everything that happened to me from that day on became a normal event. So sometimes I'm asked by kids, what sort of childhood did you have? And I tell them, I thought it was normal. Later on, I realized it was abnormal. But these children were educated. No, I'll give you a better example. Do you mind?
Please.
Yeah. A few weeks after the war, I was told I can go to school. And I was very excited because I was going to see other children. I'd been told you can play with them. I didn't know what that meant, but I went to school. Now, it was a Polish school. There were Polish children. They were my age. And because they were about my age, they had never seen a Jewish child because all the Jewish children were dead. And I get to the school, and at lunchtime, I go out in the playground, and I'm surrounded by these Polish kids who are hitting me. And they're telling me, "You Jew, you started the war." And I'm looking at them and saying, "But I wasn't even born when the war started." Didn't matter. They said, "You killed Jesus Christ." Now, how could these Polish children say this to me, a Jewish child who they'd never heard of or met? It's because their early education was by teachers who were teaching them a German syllabus. And part of that syllabus was Jew hatred. So these kids, even though the Germans were the enemy, these kids learned from their syllabus how bad Jews are, and they took it out on me. The next day my father didn't let me go to school, and until I hit the beautiful shores of Australia, I didn't go to school until the age of 9, because I was too traumatized.
But just to jump a little bit, later you became a medical doctor, you became a world famous in your field, and then you became a medical archaeologist. You publish and you speak around the world. So I suppose you did recover. The human spirit within you did enable you to recover from that trauma, nightmares notwithstanding.
Yes, I believe I recovered, but it's up to you people to judge how well I recovered. But
you think he's recovered?
But
Raquel,
it
it's
took
partly
time.
because of you, okay?
And I must say, I had a lot of help.
Okay, then let me come back to the terrible question, and both of you can answer this one. It seems that what you say is education really shapes the thinking of the people. And hence, when you sow prejudice into people, children grew up with seriously warped prejudice. Is it still happening today? 80 years later, has it gotten better? What can we do to make sure that it doesn't worsen or indeed improve? Or if you will, does mankind have hope?
Look, until the 7th of October 2023, I really believed and I lived in such a world where I really thought, yes, there was prejudice. There's always going to be prejudice. There's always going to be people who hate somebody or dislike somebody. We grew up with my parents, and Rahel did too, teaching us not to hate. And we grew up to be passionate about people who are underprivileged. But we grew up in a world, and certainly me in Australia, where there was no obvious prejudice. You went to university not on the basis of your ethnicity or anything else, but whether you were good enough. And if you were good enough, you went there. After the 7th of October, I'm very concerned, because even in my wonderful country, my own country, there is so much prejudice now and so much anti-Semitism. It's almost a daily event. This last week, they burnt a kindergarten, a children's kindergarten, next to a synagogue in Maroubra in Sydney, Australia. That hit me, because that synagogue, I had my bar mitzvah, coming of age, and next door they burnt a children's kindergarten. And they dubbed the walls with swastikas and killed Jews, all sorts of things. And this is happening in my country. And I don't understand how, but I think something's gone wrong in this world, because it's not only happening in my country, it's happening in many other countries. And all I can say to you people, I note that you don't have this problem at the moment. Make sure you don't get it, because it's a disease that consumes Look what it did to people in the Second World War and to people here. So you fight the good fight and make sure not anti-Semitism, racism doesn't occur in this country, any form.
Is racism, is anti-Semitism a kind of racism?
No, it's not a kind of racism. It is racism. And as I keep sometimes tell my students, you know, let's say you get rid of all us Jews in Australia. Do you think that'll stop racism? Forget it. Racists, their needs are somebody to blame for their failures or their inability to achieve. So you get rid of the Jews, they'll find another group. And in Australia, there's plenty of groups because we're a multicultural society. We have elements from many, many countries. They could hate the Yugoslavs, they could hate the Chinese. They'll pick somebody.
Or the Indians?
They need them. Indian, why not? They look different. That's all you need. You need to be a group that stands out, is small enough, and you start blaming them for all your problems because you're too damn lazy, too damn stupid, or something to do anything about it yourself. Why not blame somebody and then you don't have to do anything?
Raquel? Yeah. Since the day I married, I understand that women usually have better intuition than men. So tell us, from your perspective, why is such prejudice still ongoing today? Is the world getting better or is the world getting worse?
Very big question. I think there is good in anybody. People are actually born, as he said, with a blank page, and they hear, as they grow up, they hear what their parents say, what their siblings, their friends at school, their teachers. It all boils down to education, from home to school, to university, to life. I believe in the goodness of people. I know there's been a lot of bad and a lot of terrible things happened to my family and to Mark's family and to a lot of other families everywhere in the world. I don't think we can cure humanity of their failures, but we can try and achieve and learn from mistakes, and hopefully education, and hopefully we'll get better. That's my thoughts. I'm an optimist, actually, by nature.
I have a lot of questions here, primarily from students, I believe. If you don't mind, I'll just pick a few of them. If anyone in the audience here, including the 3 tables of students at the back, please do so. Just raise your hand, okay? Here's a question. Can peace be achieved through diplomacy, dialogue, and mutual understanding? Or does it sometimes require more drastic measures? I assume that, like legislature, punishment of racism of whatever sort. Is there? Will diplomacy, dialogue, and mutual understanding solve the problem?
I hope so.
Yep. Only in people of goodwill. Most wars are started not by the vast majority of people, but a few evil people who convince the majority to follow them. And I was hoping at one stage that the information revolution would teach people this sort of lesson. But unfortunately, the information resolution also allows the bad people to spread bad news and convince young people bad things. But I would hope that we don't have any more wars, because I'm a father and a grandfather. We don't want our children fighting and dying. We want them living happily. And I doubt if there's anyone in this audience who doesn't think the same. And as long as enough people think that, there won't be any wars. And I hope I'm right.
Here's a question which is a little bit philosophical. I assume it's from one of those smart students. What role does forgiveness play in the process of achieving lasting peace? Forgiveness. You mentioned to me before, Mark, that you, during 1967, the Six-Day War, you went from Australia to Israel as a medical doctor to treat soldiers, whether they are Israeli or Syrian or Egyptians or whoever, right? Is that a kind of forgiveness? Did you do it conscientiously, or you say, you ask the patient first, are you Syrian, Egyptian? If you are, out of my hands.
No, I followed the Hippocratic Oath. I didn't ask because I didn't want anybody to ask me, are you Jewish, and therefore I won't treat you. I looked at the patient, and it was a patient. It wasn't an Egyptian, wasn't a Syrian, wasn't an Israeli. I looked and saw who was the worst wounded, and I treated them. And I'd like to think that most doctors, it should be all, would do the same. Look, we were taught as children, and I've got two brothers, to be conscious of people who are being discriminated against and to stand up for their defence. And we have done this. And I think if enough people teach their children to do this, then maybe we can stop the wars and start the peace.
Here's another one. With the ongoing wars and the racial discrimination nowadays, do you think that the war similar to World War II could happen again?
I think if it does happen again, it will have dire consequences because everybody has got the atom bomb. And I think people should be wary that it could happen. Anyway, coming back to the idea of treating, I'm sorry, I'm going back.
Please.
Treating people. When I was living in Jerusalem, I volunteered. And that's another thing I want to say. I think people should be kind to each other, but also work for charity. There are a lot of things we can do for each other. And when I was in Jerusalem, I actually volunteered in a hospital where there were Palestinian Israelis, doctors, nurses, orderlies, together with Israeli natives and Israeli immigrants from other countries, working like Russia, there were a lot of Russian nurses, working together in harmony, helping all sorts of people from the West Bank, from Israel proper, all working together. It can happen. If there's goodwill, it can happen and it must happen. We have to hope for that.
Here's another one. What are your thoughts on Holocaust deniers? Holocaust deniers. They deny that Holocaust existed. Or similar groups of people with similar belief.
Yeah, well, there are quite a number of Holocaust deniers. They don't have evidence and history on their side, but it doesn't matter. These young people, they may not see the movies of the atrocities that General Eisenhower made his troops take of all the extermination camps. And the only thing I can do about it is to stand up and say, they're not telling the truth. I was there, I saw it. The truth is, the Holocaust did happen. But I fear that, I'm probably the youngest Holocaust survivor with direct memories alive. And I'm not young. What happens when most of the Holocaust survivors die and can't give that message? I'd hate to think. But that technology that's been developed, could help. But you can't stop people who want to spread lies. That's all there is to it.
Rachel, you spent some time in recent years writing a book or two about the Holocaust and Mark's experience. Why did you do that?
Well, for many years, our 3 granddaughters, we were very involved in their upbringing, used to ask Mark to tell them the story of his Holocaust experience. They were young. They were about 7, 9, and 10 when they asked those questions. And I always knew his story because his parents told me about it. As soon as they met me after we married overseas, then came to Australia, and when I met them, they started telling me the stories of his life. They thought he was a very brave person, very brave child, to follow what they said, what they asked of him, and I took it to heart. I really took it to heart. But I never had time before, 5 years ago, to sit down and write stories. I'm an artist. I paint portraits. And I was a busy mom, busy grandma, always worked for charities, wherever I was, whichever country I was living in, and which we did in a few countries. Then, when we were sitting down in quarantine with COVID, I needed something to do. Our grandchildren were always on Skype with us from Israel, from America, even from Australia. We couldn't see them. And they always asked me to draw some pictures for them. And I did. And then the thought came, I need to do something about these pictures, about the pictures also that I thought and remembered from the stories of Mark's parents. And that's how it started. And also I believe, and I wrote this book with the idea that the grandchildren are asking their grandfather what happened, but he is telling them in the first person as a child what happened to him. I thought it was a very powerful message to other children, because children would listen to children more than if they hearing about the Shoah from an adult, they won't listen so much. But if a child told them what he went through with, they'll identify with it more. And that's how the book came about.
For the book, we still have a few copies out in front. I encourage you on your way out, buy a copy, and Rachel will be happy to sign it for you. It's now almost 10 o'clock. The students still have to go to school tomorrow. We are cognizant of that. Is there any one last questions from the audience that you want to ask? We have a smart young man, Jonathan Gould, from the University of Chicago. So, Jonathan, you represent everybody here to ask the question. Microphone is behind you.
Sure, yeah. I just wanted to ask, given, being around and, after the atrocities of the Holocaust, and slowly maybe over time understanding who was behind it, certain groups of people, certain individuals, how do you yourself overcome a hatred or resentment or even prejudice against, obviously at the time your oppressors or people who were capable of doing such evil things? And how do you, clear your mind of being hateful and resentful for what happened to you?
Great question.
Look, I believe in the biblical saying, the sins of the fathers. I have no hatred for German people. If he was a Nazi and a killer, then I want to have nothing to do with that person. And maybe I don't hate him, but I certainly don't like him. But if he's a child who was born, say, the same time as me, it's not his fault. And so there is no resentment. And I'm proud to say that some of my most successful grant applications and the work I did with German scientists. And if I can boast a little bit,
Please.
My most successful grant I got from German National Science Foundation, a grant to study something to do with ancient Jericho, and it was given to us, to Israelis, Germans, and Palestinians. For a number of years we worked together, and I still work with them. And they're good scientists, they're good people. I had no problems. We got on very well. We've been on many conferences together. We've published 10 papers together in international journals. So you don't have resentment. If you have resentment, it eats you up. It's bad for you. And, one should hate Germans. Never. If you were an SS man, I don't want to know you. Otherwise, it wasn't your fault.
Mark alluded to a verse in the Bible in Jeremiah that some of you may not understand. It says that when the father eats a sour grape, the son's teeth will not feel sour. It's the father's problem, and let's stay at the father's level and not pass on to the next level. Otherwise, we're propagating prejudice, which will only make it worse. Okay, any last question? Okay, one last one.
There's a lot of them.
I think it's a student table, right? Okay, yeah, please. Tell us who you are, what school are you, what grade are you in?
I am Chiu Long Yeo from Hong Kong Chinese Women's Club College.
Chinese what?
Hong Kong Chinese Women's Club
Women's
College.
College. Okay, Women's Club College.
Yes.
Good.
It may
Good
be a
school.
very silly question, but I would like to ask that how do you overcome or how do you survive past these childhood traumas or maybe some
Same question.
nightmares that you have experienced before? How do you survive past these experiences? Because it may be a huge damage in your childhood.
How did you overcome the childhood traumas?
And
Is it because you moved to Australia, it was so pleasant, so nice, it
you
caused you to
answering his
forget?
question?
I'm asking.
Look, I blame Australia. It was a pleasant country. It was a wonderful country to grow up in. It's a wonderful country to live in. How I overcame my nightmares, the answer is I haven't. But they don't have the same effect on me. They wake me at times, but, I look around. I'm in Maroubra, which is the suburb where I grew up, and I go back to sleep. But they're there, because the horrors never leave me, but they don't have the same effect as they did when I was young. And I got on with life. If you don't get on with life, what the heck are you doing here? You shouldn't waste it.
Well, thank you, Mark and Rachel. We are so honored that you can be with us. As Roland said earlier, as the days go by, the chance of our talking to people who have gone through the trauma is going down. And so it is important that we keep the memory of human atrocity and human victory in faith, including forgiveness, that it should continue in order for our society to have a hope of a better future. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Mark and Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Professor Spigelman and Rahel. By the way, if you get the book, the rat is in the book. So Rahel has kindly consented to sign the book in the back, and we are really grateful for all of you being with us this evening. And I think it's really important that we remember. And tonight, 80th anniversary of this, occasion, and I know they both have been so eloquent in telling their stories. And I'm so delighted that Asia Society Hong Kong, like the Tolerance Center as an educational institution, can be here to do this program. We're going to take some photo, but there was a video I've asked the colleague to show you. As I hear Mark speaking, it's important of education. Somewhere along the way, these Polish kids I was beating up were being taught to hate. So a couple of years ago, we had a video. Those of you who are familiar with the musical South Pacific, one of my favorite songs from that musical was You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. And I just love that movie, and I love that song. So thanks to the help of the Rogers and Hammerstein organization, we were able to kind of play around with the lyrics and change the lyrics. Instead of being taught to hate, with the consent of the Rogers and Hammerstein organization and the help of Tony Award-winning playwright David Henry Wong, we changed the lyrics a little bit. And so we're going to end tonight with this video that was done by a group of young singers here in Hong Kong, an a cappella version. So we're going to end with this wonderful video. And again, thank you all for being here. And I'm really, really grateful for Asia Society Hong Kong and the Tolerance Center, and for Mark and Rahel for being here. Thank you so much. And have a wonderful evening. And I wanted to wish you a very happy Chinese New Year of the snake. Have a wonderful, healthy New Year's. Thank you and good night.
You've got to be taught to love and care. You've got to be taught we share the air. Let's try to remain aware of what's fair. You've got to be carefully taught.
You've got to learn not to be afraid of people whose eyes are differently made, and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to love for the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught.